for another episode of Scotty Time. I'm Scotty. Today we've got an interesting project. You know, one of the problems with these tractors is, from a headlight standpoint, you know, they really don't put adequate lights. The actual stock lights that come on this particular Kubota B2650 are just incandescent 1156 light bulbs. One of the problems that I ran into is when I have my snowplow on the front, especially the fact that they're so low, as I raise the plow, it completely blocks the illumination coming off of the stock headlights on the tractor. So our project for today is, I'm going to install LED headlights, LED spotlights up on my canopy and reverse lights. Now, as you can see, I already have these installed. So one of the things I'm going to walk through is actually show you how to take apart the dashboard, how to install the switches, how to wire everything up to the battery. And once we're done here, I'll basically have 360-degree illumination. So if I'm plowing snow at night or working with my tractor at night, I can see in all directions, and I've got very bright illumination. You know, one of the advantages to LED lights versus incandescent light bulbs actually have a filament. They have a lot more substantial current draw, which also draws off of your battery. Going to LED lights, the draw is almost 50% less, and I get more lumens or a higher power output from the lights themselves relative to what the incandescent lights are. I'm also going to go through, one of the things I did was replace the stock incandescent 1156 series bulbs on the stock headlights with LED lights, which I purchased from Super Bright LEDs. Very cheap upgrade. I believe it cost me 20 bucks just to replace those light bulbs. It was quite an increase in illumination off of the stock headlights just in doing that. But with the addition of the LED headlights here and the LED lights up on the canopy, it made a huge improvement. And with the upper lights on the canopy, once I actually raise my snowplow, or if I have my bucket or any attachment on the front, those lights are high enough to where I can see over the top of everything, still get clear illumination, and not block any of that throughout driving the tractor at night. So we'll get after it here, and I'll kind of walk you through how to do this. So here's the LED lights I'm going to replace them with. Again, I got these from Super Bright LEDs. They were about 20 bucks. With a little bit of shipping on there, I think maybe $24 total. So the first thing we'll do is take these out of the boxes. One of the things I like to do, if you notice, I've got this foam egg crate here. You know, obviously one of the problems when you work on your own equipment and whatnot and you start taking things apart, you have screws and parts. And kind of a cool tip, I like using these egg crates. You can cut a piece off, take your screws, washers and whatnot. They fit really nice inside of the egg crate itself. That way you don't have nuts and bolts rolling all over the place, and it seems to work out really well. Okay, one of the first things I'm going to do is kind of give you a before and after. This particular shot right here is with the stock incandescent bulbs, and we'll go through how to replace those with the Super Bright LEDs. So you notice I've got a headlight here, got a headlight here, and basically all you have to do is grab up in here, twist that, and we've got our two standard 1156 bulbs hanging. We're going to reach up inside of here. Basically you push them in, give them a quarter of a turn to the left, and they'll pop right out of there. We'll put in the replacement bulb. Now, one of the things I like doing that I highly recommend is, this is dielectric silicone. It's a good idea to put a little bit of an application on that, right where your contacts are going to go into the plug. It keeps it from corroding and essentially just keeps moisture from getting in there. Will add to the longevity of the bulb itself. You'll notice I've already got some applied to the end of here. It's a clear looking gel type stuff. Another thing is, you'll notice as I'm holding on to this, I'm holding on to the end of it to the best of your ability. You want to try to keep from getting fingerprints on the LED cells themselves. This is also true with an incandescent type bulb, especially if you're dealing with halogen bulbs. You can create hot spots from the oil on your skin touching the bulb, which will greatly reduce the life of the bulb itself and inherently create a problem down the road. So the first thing we're going to do is put our bulb in place, push in, give it a quarter of a turn. Then we're going to take this, put it back in place, and we'll lock it in. Get the next bulb here. Take this one, same thing, quarter of a turn, put it in place, and we'll get it up in position. Turn that in place, and it's that simple. 24 bucks with shipping, super bright LEDs. It's a standard single 1156 series bulb. So now that we've got our LED replacement 1156 series bulbs in place, I gave you a before shot with the incandescents, and here it is with the LEDs. And I can tell you at nighttime, they're significantly more bright than the standard incandescent bulbs are. Cheap addition, and they work really well. By the way, one of the things I wanted to touch on before we get started here, you'll notice that I've got the hood up. I also have the boom arms up in the air. This is going to allow me to have access to the battery, the wiring, essentially everything I need access to take panels off and whatnot. It just makes it a lot easier if the boom is in the air. You'll notice I've got a 2x4 here. I simply took an 1 1/4 hole saw, cut a 180-degree cut in the top, which fits around this top welded bar here, and then I put a notch in the bottom, which essentially connects itself to the frame. I'm going to primarily be working on the right side of the tractor here. That's where the hydraulic control arm is, and this is just a great idea while I'm working around that area and moving back and forth. I don't want to accidentally bump the hydraulic control lever and have the boom come down. This will essentially keep that from happening and provide a safe environment to work around. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is pop off the steering wheel. Most tractors will have a cover like this. There's just a center nut that holds the steering wheel on the splines. This particular one is 17 millimeter. Just spin that around. Remember, before we started, I was kind of showing you some stuff. I like using a little egg crate foam to put my fasteners and my parts in. Keeps everything from rolling around. Keeps things simple. Accordion dust cover here. It's going to slide off. Just kind of stretch it around the throttle arm here. You'll notice, like when I started out, I told you that I had everything installed, so we're going to kind of work backwards. You can see my switches for my lights. The upper one, of course, is for the upper lights on the canopy. The lower one is for the additional LED headlights. And this one over here to the left is for the rear lights themselves. So the first thing we've got to do is take off our 10 millimeter bolts here. remove this panel. We're going to have to remove the panel on both sides to get access to the screws that hold the dashboard on. Again, on this particular tractor B2650, these are 10mm bolts. I usually just put them right on the tire. That way they're in close proximity. So then to remove these panels, just pop it out a little bit. You're going to slide it forward and it'll come right out of place. You'll notice that there's a couple of holes in these channels. Those slide onto these pins right here and just keep them into place. Then the next screws we're going to remove are the actual bolts that hold on the dashboard. There is a washer and a lock washer on here. Just make sure that obviously they don't fall off. Now we'll go around to the other side. Same thing over here. That panel will just slide right off of there. Same thing, couple of holes, slide on a pin. We come over to this side. Remove our dashboard bolts. Then once we're done doing this, we should be able to slide the dash off. There's a little bit of jiggling involved. We'll go through that. One thing I did forget to mention, there is a little Phillips head screw underneath the front end here. This one little screw will make it very difficult to get the dashboard off if you do not remove it. So now at this point, all of our hardware is disconnected. You're basically going to grab onto this, just kind of shimmy it forward. And then what you're going to want to do, I bring it out to the side. If you look down in here, this is our ignition switch. There's a cable connected to that. The easiest way to deal with this is there's a plug in the back. It's got a little squeeze clip on the back. I'll show it to you once I get it out. Now we can remove the entire dashboard. But you can see on this plug there's a little clip. It's on the back side, so you got to kind of get your finger in there and push that down and then pull the plug out. Put the dashboard over to the side. So now we have full access to our dashboard. One of the things I do a couple of times a year, especially on my property, it gets pretty dusty out here and whatnot. So a couple times a year, I'll actually remove the dashboard, take an air chuck and just kind of blow things off underneath here. I think it just helps keep it all clean, keeps your connections solid, and prevents any issues from an electrical standpoint from happening. And again, you know, it keeps it pretty clean in the process. So now if you look underneath, you can see the back side of the switches and all the wires connecting to them. These are just spade connectors. Okay, so I disconnected my spade connectors here just to kind of show you. Now on a Kubota tractor from the factory, you're going to have square lugs put inside of the dash. Let me move the camera around here. They're just going to be square plugs. I simply took a hole saw and drilled out the dash And then you got to put a little notch in here for the switches that keeps them from rotating. So just to show you the switches here, these are IP65 rated 25 amp rocker switches, illuminated LED from the back. I got these on Amazon for about 17 bucks. You get a package of 6 of them. I found that the switches that actually came with the light kits, first off, they were 3 different types of switches. I kind of wanted everything to be the same. That's why I ordered these. Additionally, because I have essentially 3 different manufacturers' light kits and had the 3 different switches, none of them were weatherproof. So because I have a ROPS or a rollover protection device and not a full-blown cab, my tractor sits out in the elements, and I wanted everything to be waterproof, which these are. So now if you look, one of the things I'm going to do today in taking this apart, you'll notice I've got a pretty big bunch of wire here. I really don't need all that. When I initially installed this, I basically just wanted to get it complete, and so I zip tied everything together. So one of the things I'm going to do today is we're actually going to cut this, and I'm going to shorten it so that I don't have all this wire bunched up. You'll also notice that I've got another bunch right here, and again, I kind of want to get rid of that. The other thing I'm going to do is through a step drill bit, I'm going to drill a hole in here, and I'm going to put what's called a Hakko bushing. It's essentially a nylon bushing that pops into a hole after you drill it, and it will keep the sharp metal from attacking or cutting the wire, and then I'll have that drop through the bottom and come back up. I've noticed on my cover, for instance, where the insulation is here, it's getting kind of chewed up for pressing onto that wire, so we're going to change that. You'll notice the battery connections. Of course, I have everything disconnected. You have a fuse here, another fuse down on the bottom. That's important when you're doing something like this, just in case something shorts out. You're not going to start your tractor on fire, and the fuse will actually blow out before anything gets hurt. So I'm going to go ahead and take the zip ties off of here, and we're going to shorten up these cables. I'll show you a brief tutorial on soldering the wires back together and putting some heat shrink tubing on them, and then we'll go to the next step. One of the things I wanted to point out on these switches is you'll notice that there's a rubber cover. You have to make sure that the bottom of that cover, there's a lip on the switch right here. You want to make sure that that goes over the top of it. You can see the edge right there. That goes up against your dashboard, and what allows the switch to maintain being waterproof. You have to be careful that that does not come up like this and just lays on top. If you do that, water can get underneath there and it will not be waterproof. Got my 2 helpers here today, Reggie and Reba. Your brother and sister. Usually when I'm working on stuff, say hi, Reba. Say hi, Reggie. Best little dogs ever had right here. A couple of rescue dogs. But they're always my helpers if I'm out working on stuff. Okay, so now I'm going to pop our switches back in. Like I said, there's a little extrusion that sticks out there. That basically goes into the slot here. It keeps the switch from rotating. Snaps in place. Again, I'm making sure that my rubber seal is where it's supposed to be on the switch itself, so that that goes tight up against the dashboard. Last one here. Nice and snug. Okay. You know, one of the things I wanted to show you is wire strippers. You know, there's so many different types of wire strippers in the market. Typically you have the ones that look like a pair of pliers and you've got all the notches for the different gauges of wire and whatnot. And I don't know about you, but sometimes you go to strip a wire and you grab the wrong gauge and you end up, you know, pulling some of the conductors or the copper wires themselves out when you strip it. These right here are made by a company called L.E.D. I got this particular pair at a Murdoch's Ranch and Home. I don't know if you have them where you live, but they're pretty popular in the state of Colorado. They were 25 bucks. I know that you can find the exact same ones on Amazon. They're almost double the price. They're $43.99, but they're pretty awesome. I will include a link at the bottom of the video on these so you can you know, check them out. But one of the things I really like about them is, as I told you, I'm going to shorten up some of these wires and we're going to solder them back together. So I cut this particular cable and it's got an outer insulation and there's 3 conductors inside, or 3 different wires. What's really nice about these is I can take this, I'm going to take about, I don't know, 1.5 inches off. I just put it inside. Simple as that. I can take off the outer insulation, then separate my wires, cut them off. It's as simple as that. Great tool if you're doing any electrical work. Now we'll go ahead and connect our wires. Like I said, I had this all bulked up in here and it was all folded over. I basically cut these back, ran them through a grommet in the firewall. I don't know if you can see it or not, but it's back in here. They used to run through here and press up against the seal. I didn't really like the way that was, so now it's nice and neat. If I look at my wires that go on the switches, we can now connect those. So like I said before, one of the things I like to do is put some dielectric silicone grease on the connectors. Gives them some waterproofness and keeps them from corroding. Essentially the wire combination on this harness here, it's white, blue, black. On the other 2 harnesses I'll connect, it's red, blue, black. And essentially the red and the black are the on-off for the lights themselves. The blue is the illumination wire or the power to go to the switch itself. Always want to kind of hold the top of the switch too when you push these on, especially when they're newer. They're going to be fairly stiff. Okay, so now we've got all this cleaned up, all the extra wires gone. Like I said, it goes through the grommet in the firewall, and I'll take a zip tie to put around these. Okay, so I've got one more connection here I need to make. I'm actually going to solder this. I soldered my other connections underneath the dashboard. Now one might think, well, why not just use a crimp connector and make it easy and put it together? This is a permanent wiring situation. So for me personally, I tend to overkill on installations and whatnot. So I'm actually going to solder these connections. I thought it would be a great opportunity to show people how to properly solder. When I was in my 20s, I actually worked for an electronic company and did a lot of soldering of circuit boards and things of that nature. There's a thing called a cold soldering joint. Essentially, if you do not get the joint hot enough and you don't get the solder hot enough and you don't tin the soldering iron and keep it clean, you'll get kind of lumpy, gloppy looking solder joints, and they are not going to be solid, and you're going to have reduced continuity through the wires. So anyway, I thought I would kind of go through that and show you how I do it. And again, on all of this installation, I'm not saying that this is the right way to do things. This is the way Scotty does things. So we'll start soldering here. So the first thing I'm going to do, you can see I've got my two pieces of wire here. I've got a larger piece of shrink tubing, and I'm going to slide over this side. And then I've got two smaller pieces of shrink tubing that I'll put on my wires. And the key here is, because I've made this mistake before, put the heat shrink tubing on first. Too many times I have not done that. And once it's on, or once you have it soldered, you'd have to redo the solder joint. Take a little bit more of the main insulation off. Now what I like to do, I'll take my two pieces of wire and actually twist them together on one another. And if you are doing a solder joint like this, it's easier to do one joint at a time. If I tried twisting the other wire together, there's a chance that this could pull apart. So one of the things you want to do on your soldering iron, you'll notice I have a sponge here. The sponge is wet. You want to keep the tip of your soldering iron clean. So the first thing I'm going to do is just wipe it off. Now I'm going to do what's called tinning the soldering iron. So I'm going to put some solder on here. Basically, just give it a shake. Give it a wipe on your sponge. Now I'm going to take my soldering iron, put it underneath the wire, and you're going to add solder to it as it starts heating up. You don't have to keep it on there for an extended period of time. This particular soldering iron is made by Weller. It's their WPS 16MP. It's a lower wattage but high temperature. This will go upwards of 900 degrees, which really helps with soldering and keeps your joints clean and minimizes how long you've got to keep the soldering iron on there. So if you look at this soldering joint right here, it's nice and shiny. That means it got good and hot. It's not cold, and it's going to be a solid soldering joint. It won't come apart, and I'll have great continuity. So now I just twisted that one. Once again, I'm going to clean off my tip. I'm going to tin it one more time. Give it another wipe. I'll bring it behind. Start applying some solder, and you'll see it'll start just naturally flowing onto the wire itself. So now I've got two really good soldering joints. Got nice and hot. The solder flowed nicely. I'm going to let that cool down a minute. One of the things you have to be careful for when you do slide on the heat shrink tubing is make sure that you get it far enough away from the solder, or because of the heat it will actually start shrinking the tubing and you won't be able to get it over the solder joint itself. So these are fairly cool. So now I can slide that piece over. And then I usually take my fingers and just kind of feel where the insulation on the wire ends so that I get it centered over the joint. So now I've got my heat shrink tubing on both of those. Now I'll take my heat gun. It's always a good idea after you're using a heat gun, if you have a hot and a cool setting, run it on cool for a few seconds. It helps the coil inside kind of cool down. Again, provides longevity. This heat gun right here is actually made by Milwaukee, not the same Milwaukee tool that makes cordless drills and impacts and things of that nature. It's actually Milwaukee heat gun. I've had this heat gun for 30 years. They are bulletproof. They will heat up to over 800 degrees. But again, one of the reasons that I think it's lasted is the fact that I do run it on the cool setting after I'm done using it to cool down the coils. So now if you look at our connection here, we've got a nice solder joint. We've got heat shrink tubing internally, externally. It's a nice repair. I've essentially taken 8 feet of wire out of here that when we first started it was connected to this mounting point right here. So again, it's a lot cleaner installation now. Okay, like I mentioned, I really don't like the way I installed this. Initially, I was in kind of a hurry, and I don't want the insulation or the stripping on the inside of the cowl pushing on here. It's actually kind of pushing into it a little bit. I initially mentioned that I was going to drill a hole through here and bring it up through the bottom, and then as luck would have it with projects, I realized that there was not enough wire here. So what I'm going to do is, this is actually plastic right here on the back side of the radiator. I've got a little over an inch space right here. So I'm just going to put my hole in this piece right here. I'll put my Hakko bushing in it, and that should work out perfect. You know, I'll have plenty of wire. I don't know if you've ever seen one of these before. This is called a step bit. I like these a lot better than I do hole saws because they don't wander. I don't know if you've ever used a hole saw going through metal before, but inevitably the hole turns out larger in diameter than you would like it to. So with these bits here, it's called a step bit because you have the different steps. This one goes out to 7/8 of an inch. So each time it goes to the next level, you'll feel it push through, but at the end of the day, it gives you a very clean hole. So we'll go ahead and drill through here. Okay, we got our switches installed, got everything hooked up. We have the big bundle that I had here cleaned up. You can see kind of brought it behind this cross member, zip tied it. As we move around the front here, got it cleaned up through here. It's through our Hakko bushing. A lot cleaner installation. So when you install these, you're going to get a pair of lights. You're going to get relays. I didn't go through this process. I already had them mounted, but the relays are essential when you flip the switch on. If you wire it directly to the battery, it will overdraw the battery, and you can also overdraw the switches. So again, relays I have mounted on the firewall. So essentially you go from the battery to the relays, from the relays to the switches, and then consequently to the wiring harnesses that go to the lights themselves. So we're all complete there. If you look at the top here, this particular kit came with the canopy. You got a couple of steel brackets. They mount up on top of the canopy brackets. Nice and solid. Very bright. These are more of a directing beam, more of a spotlight sort of beam. Then I zip tied my wires to the overhead strut. They come down the backside, and then you can see the reverse lights, or the rear lights I should say. And you can see where I ran the cables down. They go underneath the chassis. And then go to the relays. Pretty easy installation overall. Easy in install, but time consuming if you want to tuck everything through the right way. So we will now go through reassembling everything, and you'll get to see how that goes back together. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is put our dashboard back on. Again, basically just going to slide this back on here. I'm going to take my plug that's going to snap back into the ignition switch. You heard it snap. Bring this around. You got a couple of slots in the front that the cruise control levers and the brake levers go on, and this just kind of fits in place like that. So we'll go ahead and put our screw in. Okay. And we'll pick a dashboard screw. We'll get our panel on. And again, if you see over here, you can see the two studs that stick out. And I'd pull the hydraulic hoses back. Just basically slides in there.
Put our dust cover, accordion back on, just stretch it over the throttle lever. This thing's a very soft rubber. It has these little tabs on the backside, or seals. That's what basically holds it in place. Gonna grab our steering wheel. Go ahead and test our lights. Top ones, lower ones, rear ones. Looks like we're good to go.
Well folks, that about wraps up our LED installation on our Kubota B2650 series tractor. We now have additional lights on our brush bar, up on our canopy, and on the rear of the tractor. Additionally, I upgraded our stock headlights with 1156 series LED bulbs, which now gave me a lot more illumination than what the factory incandescent bulbs would put out. We went into making our battery connections, running our cable from the battery to the relays, how the relays were mounted onto the dashboard, and then running the cables from the relays back to the switches. I went through removing the cowl around the dashboard to have easy access for routing our wires up to our switches, and then installation of the switches, how I put those into the dashboard. I also got into soldering. One of the connections, I wanted to shorten the cable that came with the kit, and instead of using crimp connectors in a project like this where it's more of a permanent installation, I would rather use a solder joint. It's a lot better continuity, essentially makes it like the wire was never cut. I also put heat shrink tubing on there to make it waterproof and corrosion proof, so it should pretty much last more than the time that I own this tractor. I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit the subscribe button and the like button. If you would like to receive future notifications on videos that Scotty Time posts, click the little bell next to the subscribe button, and each time I post something, you'll get a notification through your email. With that being said, once again, we can't thank you enough for joining our video today. Once again, this is Scotty Time. I'm Scotty. God bless America, and thanks for watching.